24 Republicans voted no, telling me that 24 Republicans are so corporate captured, that they are so subservient to or are members of the shareholder class, which is the only class of Americans that benefits from hidden fees and deceptive marketing, that they would vote against a bill that is so obviously beneficial to the vast majority of Americans. It's mind-blowing to me that anyone would be so shameless as to vote in favor of hidden fees. And so you might want to check and see if you sent one of those 24 people to Congress.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 301st episode of the Congressional Dish Podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Briney, and today I have a gift for you. I have created a study guide for the 2024 congressional election, which should make your job of deciding how to vote much, much easier. Because I know better than most that it's really tough to judge our members of Congress based on their voting records because so many of the bills that become laws are packages. So like this year, the money for Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, the TikTok ban, a bunch of sanctions, all of that stuff was passed in one massive package. And so it's hard to know how to hold anyone accountable for that vote because it's almost impossible to know why each person voted the way they did without hunting down interviews which the members of Congress may or may not have even given. And so what we need in order to judge job performance are votes on single-issue bills. And while it takes some digging, they do exist if you know where to look. And lucky for you, I know where to look. And so by searching through every bill that passed through each branch of Congress during the 118th Congress, as of this recording, there have been 504 bills that passed the House of Representatives and 114 that passed the Senate. We were able to find 11 votes in the House and 4 in the Senate that were single-issue votes, that were relatively easy to understand, and were on topics ranging from matters of war, the environment, energy, privacy, reproductive rights, the economy, and TikTok. And on top of telling you about these votes today on this episode, the real gift we have for you are the show notes. Our amazing professional librarian, Claire, used her organizational and information presentation skills to create a masterpiece for you, with all of the information that you need to understand the backstory and purpose of each bill, links to highlighted PDFs of all the texts so that you can see the legal changes that they made or tried to make for yourself. We have links to the bill summaries on congress.gov and GovTrack. And of course, we have links to the votes so that you can see if your member of Congress voted the way you wanted them to. And we are hoping that you will take 5 to 10 minutes. Doesn't take that long because the information is so easy for you to find. But we're hoping that you'll take that 5 to 10 minutes to do your research on your member of Congress and make sure that they are actually voting the way you want them to before you decide to rehire them to the 119th Congress. But I've got to tell you, sifting through over 600 bills is time-consuming and tedious, and it's work that I'm pretty damn sure you didn't want to do yourself. And so if you get any value from this work being done for you and for America, please financially support Congressional Dish. We absolutely love your Venmos that tell us which episode you're paying for and any comments that you have. And of course, the loves of our lives are those who help us do this work regularly by paying us consistently with paper checks or PayPal auto payments or Zells or the people that support us per episode on Patreon. This show would have ended a long time ago without our regular supporters. But freeloaders, we do need you to step up, please. And so please support this work with whatever you can afford. This project is crowdfunded, which means that we don't need you to pay a lot, but we do need you to pay something. And we leave that amount up to you. We provide you something of value, you decide how valuable it is, and you return that to us in some kind of financial form. And we also need you to share this study guide widely, because you know that most Americans are voting for Congress without having a clue as to what their member of Congress actually did. And so please help educate them by sharing this with as many people as you can. And it's easy to do. All you have to do is share the show notes on your social media or blast them out with an email, and you've done your part. But in today's podcast episode, I'm going to run down what the bills are for you in the study guide and give you my analysis of them, if you're interested. In telling you about these bills, you're probably going to be able to pretty easily figure out how I feel about them, because this show would be pretty damn boring for both of us if I hid all of my many feelings. But as always, you are not required to agree with me. I'm giving you the facts even if they come with a heavy dose of enthusiasm or disdain. Agree or disagree, all that matters is that you make up your mind about the bill using either my descriptions or the show notes. Because this episode is all about doing your election homework using those show notes. And so honestly, if you don't want to deal with me, you don't really have to listen to this episode at all. Everything you need for this one is in the show notes for episode 301 on congressionaldish.com. But if you've decided to stick with me, let's get started. But before I get to the bills, here's a real quick reminder of what representation you have in the 118th Congress. And I'm sorry if this is super basic. I don't mean to be patronizing, but there are a lot of Americans who don't know this, and I don't want to assume knowledge, especially because we might, hopefully, get some first-time voters to listen to this episode. So real quick, every American who gets to vote, because not all of us do get to vote in our bullshit democracy, but every American outside of the territories in Washington, D.C. who have full voting rights have 2 senators and 1 member of the House of Representatives. Now, who represents you in the Senate is pretty easy to figure out. Each state has 2 senators. But the House representation is kind of by zip code. The way most states draw their House district maps is super fucked up. Basically, political parties often get to draw them, and they draw them in ways that benefit themselves. And so the districts often make no logical sense geographically. The way most of our districts are drawn is called gerrymandering, and it shouldn't be allowed, but it is. God bless America. But to figure out who your representative is, you can usually use your zip code. But because of gerrymandering, sometimes a zip code is in 2 different districts, and so you might have to type in your full address. But go to the show notes and we will have a link where you can look up your district to see who represents you in the House in the 118th Congress. And today we're going to focus mostly on the House for 2 reasons. 1, the senators are the celebrities. And so most of us, if we know anything about Congress, we generally know who our senators are, as there's only 100 total and they get the most media attention. And so you're probably going to need more information to judge your likely unknown member of the House. But then 2, the Senate doesn't do much anymore. Like I said, they only passed 114 bills, while the House of Representatives passed 504. And so I just had more single-issue bills to work with from the House. But let's get started with the one bill that became a law in this Congress, which was pretty much a one-issue bill, and that is the FISA reauthorization, H.R. 7888. And this is a bill that I told you all about after I read and highlighted the law for you in the episode 291 called Warrantless Spying Continues. And that episode, if you want to hear it, has highlights from the debates about the FISA reauthorization. But here's the Cliff's Notes version of an explanation for your study guide. So right after 9/11 in 2002, President George W. Bush secretly and illegally authorized the National Security Agency to eavesdrop on foreigners and, in the process, any Americans that the foreigners were communicating with without first getting a warrant. Now, the National Security Agency said that after they were given this power, that they were very careful to only spy on Americans in limited circumstances. We were told that Americans' information was only collected essentially by accident in search of the terrorists. But the NSA officials were lying. They were actually collecting the digital information of literally everyone on the planet without a warrant, because they were essentially just hooking into the wires that carry the internet They copied everything and then stored it in massive data centers. This was a huge scandal when we found out. And then to make matters worse, in 2008, as the term-limited George W. Bush administration was on its way out the door, Congress passed and W signed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act amendments of 2008, which gave immunity to the companies that said "F the Fourth Amendment" and cooperated with W. Bush's illegal spying program. The 2008 law also created the FISA 702 program, which is the program that 16 years later just got reauthorized by the 118th Congress. Now, FISA 702 basically legalizes what the NSA told us that they were doing to begin with, spying on foreigners outside the United States and collecting Americans' information if they are communicating with specific individuals being targeted by the NSA. And the oversight process is done by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, nicknamed the FISA Court, which rarely denies a secret spying warrant request made by the spooks against a target, whether that target is foreign or domestic. And so that's the spying program that was renewed in the FISA reauthorization law by your members of Congress, in both the House and the Senate, and which was then signed by President Biden. But the reauthorization, if you don't already know how you want your member of Congress to vote, the reauthorization did make some changes to the program. And so first, the reauthorization of the spying program limited database searches by government officials because we found out that the FBI broke the law and accessed the database illegally at least 278,000 times. Because you see, the FBI is only supposed to snoop through the database that stores information collected via the FISA process to look for information about Americans if the search is, quoting directly from the old law, quote, reasonably likely to return foreign intelligence information or evidence of a crime, unquote. And the FBI abused the evidence of a crime part of that sentence 278,000 times. 278,000 times the FBI used the database to conduct searches about domestic criminal investigations that had nothing to do with national security or any foreign person, company, or government. And so, thanks to the FISA reauthorization, the FBI is no longer legally allowed to search the database solely to find evidence of a crime. They abused their power, and they lost their power, which is a rare little win for privacy. The new law also limits the number of people within the government allowed to use the database, and the new law also prevents the FBI from using uncorroborated information from political groups or anonymous sources in press reports to get secret FISA warrants, which is almost certainly because we now know that the FBI used bullshit information paid for by the Clinton campaign to get a secret FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page, who was a member of the Trump campaign back in 2016. And so that's the good stuff in the new law, at least in my opinion, the good stuff. But I'm admittedly neither an FBI agent nor a spook. But there is some stuff that my not a spook ass didn't exactly love. So first, the new law expands the definition of foreign intelligence allowed to be used to get secret spying warrants against us to include counter-narcotics targets, so drug war targets. And a quick reminder, marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I, as bad as it gets, drug by the federal government, even though it feels pretty damn legal all over this country, and even though millions and millions of us are using it and buying it with our debit cards at dispensaries and liquor stores and now bars. I've personally bought THC-infused drinks in bars in both Tennessee and Texas, which are both states where I thought that THC was still illegal. But there are loopholes, and now there are weed drinks in bars in the South, apparently. And so, like I said, weed feels pretty legal in most parts of the United States, even though the reality is that it very much is not. Which I remind you because as long as a drug is officially illegal on the books, purchase and use of it can be used against you legally. And I know that the idea that someone in the government just wants to get you sounds and is pretty paranoid for most everyone. But I do this for a living. I shine lights on parts of the government that some people in government would rather remain in the dark. And this show is still tiny, due largely to my total failure to do marketing, but someday if I keep going, people might know my name. People might know my work, and powerful people may be threatened by my work. And even at this tiny size, I know for sure, I'm 100% sure that there are people who work every day inside Congress who regularly listen to this podcast. And so I know that I am fucking with powerful people, and with every episode and with every new listener, I am well aware that I am flying ever closer to the sun. Which is probably one of the reasons that I don't market the show, because I'm pretty sure that's terrifying and I am a coward. But I am also still a bit of a stoner. I use 5 milligram gummies a couple times a week, which anyone who knows weed will tell you that's not much. I actually feel weird even calling myself a stoner anymore at my measly levels, but the truth is that that is federally illegal. It is still Schedule 1. I have bought it. I have used my debit card. I use it. And I'm basically admitting to you right now that I habitually commit a federal crime, which makes me eligible now for a secret FISA warrant. And I also know that by saying this, I'm kind of daring the feds to come get me, because getting arrested for weed, oh my God, nothing would make my show go viral faster. So fucking bring it. Maybe I'm not a coward after all. But my point is that the new law made drug war FISA spying eligible, and I feel a little less safe because of it. We know the long history of these spying permissions being twisted to allow the FBI and other parts of the federal government to do whatever the hell they want to do. Remember the 278,000 times? And along the same lines, in addition to expanding the criteria for warrants, the new law also expands how many people can be targeted with them by expanding the Department of Justice's ability to search the database to vet foreigners who are applying for visas to travel to the United States. So do you know someone who lives overseas who might want to visit you here in the States? Because if they apply for a tourist visa, the FBI can spy on your communications with them if they want to. And then finally, the new law expanded the definition of electronic communication service provider, which serves to expand the number of companies that would get immunity for turning our information over to the government. And so now, knowing what's in the FISA reauthorization, how would you want your representative and senators to vote? Well, to find out how they voted, go to the show notes and check out H.R. 7888, Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act. And this vote you're going to have to look up because these votes were not along political party lines. And so 65% of the House of Representatives voted for this, the majority of both parties saying yes. So there was 126 Republicans that said yes, 88 who said no, and there were 147 Democrats who said yes and 59 who said no. And it was actually very similar in the Senate. 64% of the Senate said yes to this reauthorization. And it was also similarly split. There were 30 Republicans who said yes, 16 who said no. There were 28 Democrats who said yes, 17 who said no, 2 independents said yes, and 1 who said no. So you're going to have to look them up because party is going to tell you nothing. And so that's the only law that was single issue enough to make it into the study guide, because this Congress didn't really accomplish much. But for your research on your House representatives' voting record, there was a vote on one amendment to the FISA reauthorization that was instructive and worth taking a look at, and that's the so-called Biggs Amendment, which would have required that the FBI and other government agencies get warrants before they're allowed to search through the database of information collected via the FISA spying process. And so they already have to get warrants. Secret warrants that are stupid easy to get, but warrants nonetheless, to authorize the spying. And so this amendment would have also required warrants to snoop through the information collected, much of it about people who are not direct targets of FISA warrants, but are snooped on incidentally. And the vote on this amendment, it tied 212 to 212, and when there is a tie vote, the amendment fails. And once again, party tells you nothing. I can tell you that in general, the Republicans were more in favor of requiring these warrants. So there were, in the Republican Party, 128 yeses to 86 noes. And the Democrats, there were 84 yeses to requiring warrants to 126 noes. But yeah, it tied. And this was another one you're just going to have to see for yourself. And so go ahead and look up the Biggs Amendment in the show notes to see how your representative voted on the warrant issue. Another vote worth looking at is the so-called TikTok ban, although Congressional Dish listeners know that this law threatens our ability to access so much more than TikTok. Now, I gave you all the details about this in Congressional Dish 289, the Not a TikTok ban bill. And in that episode, the law was still a bill, but I, after the fact, compared the two versions, and there was only one change between the bill version that I told you about in that episode and the version that became law, and it wasn't anything substantial. And so you can use that episode to learn the big picture about what the new law does. But to summarize it real quick, first of all, this law is so much bigger than TikTok, even though TikTok was the subject of all the media buzz and the nickname. But this new law applies to all apps, websites, and games that are even partially owned by a foreign adversary, which right now includes not just China, but also Iran, Russia, and North Korea. And that list can be expanded at any time. And which apps, websites, and games partially owned by people from the currently listed bad countries that are allowed to be targeted, that is determined by the president alone. And so this is an expansion of presidential power. And like I said, this is far, far broader than just TikTok. And the point of the law is to force sales of targeted apps, websites, and games, but by not actually forcing a sale. Instead, it makes it illegal to help the baddie apps, websites, and games to be provided to United States customers unless the foreign companies sell them. And the pressure to make that happen is applied in two ways. First, the bill makes it illegal to distribute or update foreign adversary-controlled apps or games in a marketplace. In other words, the law makes it illegal for Apple and Google to provide baddie apps or games in their app stores. And then two, the law makes it illegal to provide internet hosting to foreign adversary-controlled apps, websites, or games. So in other words, it makes it illegal for companies like Oracle and other hosting companies to provide baddie apps, websites, and games a place to store and manage their data. And then the penalties against the companies that distribute or host these apps, websites, and games are enormous. Like $500 billion kind of enormous. Put even giant companies out of business kind of enormous. And so the strategy is to get American companies like Apple and Google and Oracle to decide that delisting and not offering the apps, websites, or games is a matter of survival for their own businesses. Unless, of course, the company that owns the app, website, or game can be pressured to sell those items, then the problem goes away. And so that's how the law forces the sales, by threatening mostly American companies who are doing nothing wrong, or at least nothing wrong in this instance. And the only changes that were made to the House bill version of this so-called TikTok ban, the only difference between the bill that I read in that episode and what became law, are the amount of time that the companies are given to divest before the existential penalties hit the app stores and hosting providers. So the law version increased the amount of time that the companies have from 180 days to 270 days and added the ability for the president to extend that one time by 90 days. That's the only change. But we can't use the vote that made this law in order to judge our representatives and senators because, like I said, the so-called TikTok ban became law as a part of a giant package with war money and sanctions and all kinds of other shit attached. And so you can really only judge your member of the House for their vote on this one by using the vote on the original bill. That original bill is H.R. 7521, the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act. And this is another vote that you're going to have to see for yourself because it wasn't party line. The vast majority of both parties voted yes on this new presidential censorship power. There were 197 Republicans and 155 Democrats who said yes. There were only 15 Republicans and 50 Democrats who voted against it. And so go to the show notes and find out which side your one member of the House was on. Continuing with the bills that passed only the House, there are two single-issue votes on foreign policy that I suspect you're going to want to see. One of them is H.R. 8034, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act. And this is another bill that became law as a part of that package. That same bill package with the Ukraine aid and Taiwan aid and TikTok ban and yada, yada, yada. But there was a standalone vote in the House on just money for Israel. And I can't remember if it's the same exact text of what became law, but it doesn't really matter for purposes of judging the vote. Because this vote was on a bill that would have provided almost $26 billion to Israel. 64% of the money would be for war expenses, 35% of the money would be for humanitarian purposes, and less than 1% of the money would be for diplomacy expenses. The bill also would have provided $400 million for the Federal Emergency Management Administration, also known as FEMA, which takes care of us in emergencies here at home. Now, this vote was on April 20th, 2024, when the official death toll in Gaza was 33,843 human beings, which is the equivalent of 28 October 7th. Also, this vote took place well past the time when the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel's destruction of Gaza was plausibly a genocide. That's a quote. And that ruling was almost 3 months before this vote took place. But despite the awfulness of all of that and the shame that I know I feel as an American for funding it, 86% of the House of Representatives voted to send Israel $26 billion, mostly for weapons, to help them keep doing this to Gaza. And as I record this on September 27th, the Netanyahu government is not only continuing to kill people every day in Gaza, but they have expanded their killing spree to Lebanon as well. In fact, they just dropped 10 missiles on a residential neighborhood in Lebanon right before I pressed record, and so, in case you can't tell, I'm fucking livid right now. Our complicity in all this death, for me, is unforgivable. And for me, a vote for billions in weapons for Israel in April, after 33,843 deaths and a yup, that's a genocide ruling, that is unforgivable. And if you agree, or even if you don't, H.R. 8034 is the vote to look at to see if your representative voted in a way that properly represents you. And moving north to the other war we're paying for, H.R. 8035 is the Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act. And again, money for Ukraine was approved in that giant package, but the House did vote on this single-issue Ukraine Security Supplemental Appropriations Act, which, had it passed on its own, would have provided over $60 billion for Ukraine and neighboring countries. 83% of that money would have been for war expenses, 16.5% of the money would be for humanitarian expenses, and less than 0.5% of the money would be for diplomacy. This bill also would have provided $341 million for production of nuclear weapons materials and nuclear non-proliferation programs, which, yes, makes no damn sense. Because we really can't prevent the spread of nuclear weapons when we are producing more nuclear weapons. And on this bill, if you are represented by a Democrat in the House, let me save you the trouble of looking up their vote because every Democrat voted yes. But the Republicans, they were split. 101 voted for it and 112 voted against it. And so check out the vote on H.R. 8035 to see if their vote matched your wishes. Now, moving on to figure out who in the House of Representatives is going to be a good steward of the environment, we have H.R. 7023, the Creating Confidence in Clean Water Permitting Act. And this, I will just tell you right now, was a Republican bill supported almost entirely by Republicans. There was only one Republican that voted against it, and there were only 2 Democrats that voted for it. So this one was pretty close to party line. And this Republican bill would have doubled the length of permits that allow pollutants to be dumped in waterways from 5 years to 10 years. It then would have created nationwide permits to allow for transmission projects for people, water, wastewater, carbon dioxide, fuel, and oil and gas pipelines for projects that do not result in a, quote, loss greater than a half acre of water of the United States for each single and complete project, unquote. Now, a half acre is approximately 13,500 gallons of water. And so that much water would be allowed to be essentially poisoned or eliminated per project. And there were no limits to the number of projects that could be approved with these nationwide blanket pollution permits. And then, when the nationwide permits would be up for renewal, the permits would get a shortcut to environmental assessments that are required by the National Environmental Policy Act, And the Environmental Protection Agency would not be required to consult with a state nor any other federal agency, essentially denying the people who live near these projects a right to be consulted on pollution permit renewals in our own hometowns. Then, to further make sure that once a permit is issued and that it is damn near impossible to revoke, this bill would have removed the Environmental Protection Agency administrator's ability to cancel previously approved discharges of pollution in specific disposal sites if he or she determines that the discharge of materials would have an unacceptable adverse effect on municipal water supplies, shellfish beds and fishery areas, wildlife, or recreational areas after a disposal permit has been issued. And this provision appeared to be inserted into the bill by the Party of Pollution because of some specific recent pollution permit reversals. And so here's Representative Rick Larson, a Democrat from Washington State, speaking during the House's debate on this bill on March 21st.
Since enactment of the Clean Water Act in 1972, EPA has only exercised its authority 14 times, most recently in relation to large-scale mining proposals in Alaska and West Virginia. EPA's use of this authority has, in fact, been bipartisan. EPA used it 2 times during Democratic administrations and 12 times during Republican administrations.
And I looked up those 2 permit denials and found 2 projects that, quite frankly, never should have been approved to begin with. So first, in Alaska, in January of 2023, the EPA blocked the so-called Pebble Mine. The Pebble Mine was a proposed copper and gold mine that would have been owned by a Canada-based company called Northern Dynasty Minerals. The EPA blocked it because it would have polluted the Bristol Bay watershed, which is home to the world's largest sockeye salmon fishery. The EPA, citing an analysis by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, said that discharges of dredged or fill material to build and operate the proposed mine site would have resulted in a loss of about 100 miles of stream habitat as well as wetlands. And people in the Bristol Bay region had been fighting the project for more than a decade because of the certain pollution of their town, and the region's salmon fishery supports 15,000 American jobs. And so basically, the EPA didn't allow a Canadian company to pollute an American bay and destroy an American fishing industry. And then the second example he cited refers to an EPA denial that was issued in January of 2011, which killed the Spruce No. 1 mine in West Virginia. The Spruce No. 1 mine was a 2,000-acre coal mine proposed in 1999 and permitted by the fossil fuel industry-captured George W. Bush administration in 2007. This project would have blown up 2,000 acres of forest on a mountaintop, which would have buried 6 miles of streams in debris, causing all kinds of downstream contamination because, of course it would. They were blowing up a mountain. And when the Obama administration took power, an administration that gave half a shit about the environment, they revoked the permit for this disaster in waiting. And those are the only times the veto authority has been used this century by the Environmental Protection Agency. And so I don't define that as a power that is being abused. But regardless, the Party of Pollution wants to prevent an incoming administration from reversing their poisonous permitting decisions ever again. On top of that, H.R. 7023 would have limited judicial review of permitting decisions by putting a 60-day time limit after the permit is issued for a judicial review. But then the bill also wouldn't allow anyone who didn't file a comment during the public comment period to file a lawsuit. And even if someone did file a comment, they couldn't file a lawsuit about anything that they didn't address in their comment. Which essentially means that if someone like you or I didn't even know about a pending permit and wanted to fight the permit that would allow pollution around our homes after it's granted and announced, we would be denied that right in court. And then finally, the bill would have prohibited the court from vacating, revoking, or limiting a pollution permit unless the court found that the activities authorized, quote, present an imminent and substantial danger to human health or the environment for which there is not other equitable remedy available under law, unquote, which means that a court couldn't do anything about long-term or incremental threats to our health posed by permitted pollution. Now, I think it's quite obvious that this bill wasn't written to protect me in any way, as it would handcuff my government from acting to keep my drinking water clean. And so who was this written to serve? Well, The author told us. Here's the author of this toxic bill, Representative David Rouser of North Carolina, speaking on the floor of the House of Representatives during the debate on March 21st.
And Mr. Chairman, in closing, I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this bill, which provides predictability and certainty that our utilities, energy, manufacturing, and agriculture industries need to succeed, which are so critical to American greatness in energy, food production, and the manufacturing necessary to improve the standard of living of every American. That's what this is about, Mr. Chairman.
It's about the energy industry. It's about the manufacturing industry. It's about the agricultural industry. It's about industry, industry, industry. It's about letting big businesses be free, even if they poison you and me. And again, every Republican except for one in the House voted for this. The only Republican no was Representative Morgan Griffith of Virginia's 9th District. And to their credit, almost every Democrat voted against it. The two that joined the Party of Pollution were Donald Davis of North Carolina's 1st, and of course, Henry Culler of Texas's 28th. That guy, he might as well be a Republican for how much pollution he supports. And to continue to judge your House member's environmental record, you can also use H.R. 1435, the Preserving Choice in Vehicle Purchases Act, which is an environment and states' rights kind of bill. Now, the backstory on this one is that in 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom of California signed an executive order that directs the California Air Resources Board to phase out the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles by 2035 in the state of California, which he's legally allowed to do because federal law allows the EPA to give states waivers, which California has, to allow the state to make its own pollution standards as long as they are at least as strict as federal standards. And so California got a waiver and created a standard that is stricter than the federal standards, which they are totally allowed to do. And so practically, the California decision means that starting in 2035, all new passenger cars and trucks sold in the state must be zero-emission vehicles, which would effectively end the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles in California. However, this is not a ban on gas-powered engines. Anyone who already has a fossil fuel guzzler would be allowed to drive it until it dies, and used fossil fuelies could still be sold in California. This would only apply to new cars and trucks. And this doesn't necessarily mean that all new cars would have to be electric either. They would have to be zero emission, which allows for hydrogen-powered vehicles and whatever new clean technology might be invented. The requirement is simply for the cars to stop polluting California's air with carbon dioxide and other poisons. But again, Republicans in the House of Representatives wrote a bill to allow the pollution to continue. H.R. 1435 would prevent a state from banning new vehicles with internal combustion or gas engines by requiring the EPA to reject a state's waiver application to do so. And then it would also require the EPA to retroactively repeal any waivers that they've granted since January of 2022, which is a provision that is obviously aimed at California. And so essentially, this would take away California's legal right to enact pollution rules so long as they are at least as strict as the federal rules. Essentially, this is a pro-pollution bill that reduces states' rights. And every Republican voted for it. Every single one of them. You don't even have to bother to look it up. 214-0. The Democrats, though, they were a mixed bag. Most of them voted against it. 190 of them voted against it, but 8 of them voted for it. So if your member of the House is a Democrat, this is one you're going to want to look up. And while we're on the topic of pollution, let's take a look at the bill the House passed that expands fracking. Now, fracking is the process of getting fossil fuel gases out of the ground, collecting them, and preparing them for burning for energy. And fracking has 3 important downsides that you need to know about. 1, the so-called natural gas that is produced by fracking is actually largely methane, which heats the atmosphere even faster than carbon dioxide, which is not great if you want to minimize the dangers posed by a climate that is changing faster than our ability to adapt. By the way, I'm recording this during Hurricane Helene, and many cars and homes in Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, the Virginias, a lot of places, are currently underwater because of it. And so fracking for and burning methane gas only makes events like this more frequent and more severe. 2, fracking poisons a lot of fresh water. And that is happening in places like West Texas, which is increasingly experiencing extreme droughts like it is right now. In fact, parts of frack land in West Texas are experiencing the highest possible level of drought as I speak. And then 3, fracking, specifically the disposal of all the water that gets poisoned during the fracking process, which they then inject back into the ground, well, doing that causes earthquakes. And a fun fact, I have experienced 2 possible, likely, frack quakes during the last 3 months here in Austin, Texas, a place that generally doesn't get earthquakes. And what's wild is that I felt the earthquakes from all the way out in frack land in West Texas, which is more than 300 miles from here, or a 5-hour drive away. And that's because these earthquakes were big. There was a 4.9 that I felt on July 22nd, and there was a 5.1 that Joe and I both felt on September 16th. Those are not small, and this is not normal. Justin Rubinstein, who is a research geophysicist at the U.S. Geological Survey, told a reporter with mysanantonio.com that, quote, the earthquake rate in the broader Eagle Ford Shale, which stretches from approximately Lagrange, southwest all the way to the border with Mexico, has risen significantly since 2018, unquote, and, quote, the earthquakes have also gotten larger, unquote. And while the cause of the earthquakes can't be directly blamed on the oil and gas operations, the U.S. Geological Survey says that improper wastewater disposal from the oil and gas industry can be a large contributor to earthquakes in the region. And officials in Frackland, Texas, are currently fighting the oil and gas industry to stop the improper wastewater disposals. And so that's why fracking is controversial. So-called natural gas production is causing some unnatural effects, including poisoned air, poisoned water, a rapidly changing climate, and earthquakes. And so the Republicans in the House, literally all of them, voted unanimously to pass a bill that would have the effect of expanding the production of and use of fossil fuel gas. And it would do so by giving the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission the, quote, exclusive authority, unquote, to approve or deny applications to export natural gas from the United States to a foreign country, which eliminates requirements for the Department of Energy approval. The bill would also deem exportation or importation of fossil fuel gas to be in the public interest, which prevents any officials from saying that it's not in the public interest, perhaps because of the poisoned air, poisoned water, climate chaos, or frack quakes. Essentially, by dramatically reducing the approvals needed to suck up gas out of the ground in the United States and then ship it around the world for profit, it is likely that more gas would be sucked out of the ground in the United States and shipped around the world for profit, which means that U.S. neighborhoods would have to deal with more poisoned air, poisoned water, and frack quakes, also that multinational fossil fuel corporations can amass profits and pass more money out to the shareholder class. And that's who benefits from this bill: people making money, the shareholder class, and those inside the United States who make money gathering and selling the gas. There is a constituency being served by slashing the export approval process like this. But it harms American communities by likely facilitating the release of more toxins into our air, poisons into our water, releasing earthquakes to shake our homes and possibly damage them, and by rapidly changing the climate, making all of us more susceptible to weather extremes. And so I guess to judge this bill, you really need to decide which side you're on, the shareholder class or the rest of us. But it's clear which side the Republicans in the House are on. You don't have to look this one up. If you are represented by a House Republican, every single one of them who voted on behalf of those who make money exporting fossil fuels for profit. But if you are represented by the Democrats, you need to look up this vote too. This is HR 7176. And you got to look it up because 9 Democrats sided with the shareholder class and the fossil fuel profiteers, while the rest of the Democrats sided with those who prioritize clean air, water, and solid, uncracked foundations on our homes, and those who want to keep the already lax approval process from getting even less protective than it's already not. Moving on, let's talk about money, specifically bills that would help you make wise decisions about what to do with it. And one such bill that would do that is HR 3950, the Ticket Act. This bill would force event ticket sellers to tell us the total price upfront, as opposed to making it a surprise at the end of our shopping process. So, for example, right now on Ticketmaster, there are tickets available to see a comedian named Tom Segura. He's very funny here in Austin, Texas. And he's not performing until February, which is strangely long time away considering he lives here now. But whatever. If I wanted to go to that show, I looked it up. They are advertising nosebleed tickets, which I can afford, for $37 each. But only after I was forced to sign in and got all the way to the checkout page did I discover that the ticket is actually $51.91, because I'm going to be charged $14.15 in bullshit hidden Ticketmaster fees. But the Ticket Act would require ticket issuers like Ticketmaster and secondary market ticket issuers like StubHub and, a whole bunch of others to clearly display the total ticket price, including all of their fees, at the time that the ticket price is first displayed. And they have to provide us an itemized list of charges before the ticket purchasing process is complete. And so, had this been law, instead of seeing $37 listed on the first page, I would have seen approximately $51, the true price that includes the Ticketmaster fees. The bill would also prohibit ticket sellers from selling tickets that they do not physically have at the time of sale. And the bill would crack down on deceptive marketing by prohibiting secondary ticket issuers from using the word official or any similar words that imply a partnership that doesn't actually exist, unless, of course, they do have the consent of the venue, the team, or the artist. And then finally, the bill would require ticket issuers to provide a refund or a similar ticket to a rescheduled event with the approval of the customer if an event is canceled or postponed, except for in the case of a natural disaster or another event beyond the ticket issuer's control. And I love this bill. I love everything about it. And most of the House of Representatives did too. 94% of the House voted for it, including every single Democrat. You don't have to look that up. But 24 Republicans voted no, telling me that 24 Republicans are so corporate captured, that they are so subservient to or are members of the shareholder class, which is the only class of Americans that benefits from hidden fees and deceptive marketing, that they would vote against a bill that is so obviously beneficial to the vast majority of Americans. It's mind-blowing to me that anyone would be so shameless as to vote in favor of hidden fees. And so you might want to check and see if you sent one of those 24 people to Congress. Because this vote wasn't some kind of a fluke. In another bill, they did it again. So I also included the vote for H.R. 6543 in your study guide, and this is the No Hidden Fees Act of 2023, which would similarly require providers of short-term lodging, so like hotels and Airbnbs, and internet platforms that advertise and sell short-term lodging to display the total price, including all mandatory fees, except for government taxes and fees. And again, this one passed with 94% of the House of Representatives voting for it, except for 25 Republicans who voted against it. And I looked at the names. It's not exact, but there's a lot of overlap with the ticketing vote. And so go ahead and check in the show notes to see if you're represented by one of those 25 shameless Republican corporate hacks that supports hidden fees. And then get them the out of our Congress, please. And then finally, wrapping up our House voting section of the study guide, we have H.R. 4639, the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. Now, this bill was triggered in June of 2023, when a declassified government report confirmed for the first time that U.S. intelligence and spy agencies buy information about Americans, including data from our cars, our web browsing data, and our smartphones, and use it to track us down for law enforcement purposes. So, for example, the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, our tax collectors, they bought access to a huge database storing the location data of millions of our phones to try and catch tax cheaters. And similar phone location data was bought and used by Homeland Security for immigration enforcement. Now, technologically, this is possible because commercially available data can be easily de-anonymized to identify us. So our location data, for example, can be used to figure out where people live and work. So, for example, if you see where I am via my location data in the middle of the night most nights, you can pretty easily figure out where I live. And legally, this is possible because the United States doesn't have a privacy or data protection law in any way governing the sharing or selling of Americans' private information. It's a legal Wild West situation here in the United States. The corporations are all kinds of free when it comes to selling the information that they collect about us. And this is rare in the world. We are one of the few big deal countries without a data protection or privacy law. And so, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence's report says that where our information, like our location data, is openly for sale to the general public, U.S. intelligence agencies can and do purchase it. Although we do have to note that this theory has not been challenged in federal court. But H.R. 4639, if it were to become law, would eliminate any questions and basically say no. The cops and spooks are not allowed to buy our information to get around getting warrants. Specifically, the bill would prohibit law enforcement or the intelligence community from buying customer or subscriber information directly from companies or from data brokers. And then it wouldn't allow any information that is illegitimately obtained to be used against us in court. And if you're worried about the terrorists, it, of course, has exceptions for FISA surveillance. But the bill would also tighten up the FISA spying by limiting immunity for companies that comply with surveillance orders, but then don't stop the surveillance when a court order is denied. And I like this bill too, and so did a slight majority of the House. This one passed with 52% of the House voting yes, but this vote was whatever the opposite of party line is. Because when it comes to the Republicans, more of them voted for it than against it. They voted 123 to 90. And when it comes to the Democrats, most of them voted against it. There was 109 no's to 96 yeses. And so the vote on H.R. 4639 is a vote that you're also going to have to check out to see how your representative voted. Because party affiliation, once again, will tell you nothing on this one. Okay. So those are all the standalone issue bill votes in the House. And so let's move on over to the Senate, which at this point is an institution that exists almost solely to approve judicial nominations. But they did pass a few bills, and so here's 3 single-issue votes that you can use to judge their job performances, on top of the FISA reauthorization, of course. So the first one I have for you is a war authorization vote, or more accurately, the ending of a war authorization vote. So S-316 is a bill that would have repealed the authorizations for the U.S. military operations in Iraq that were passed in 1991 and 2002, which, since we're not at war with the long-dead president of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, anymore, this is a move that makes sense to a lot of us. But to be clear, even if this bill became law, this would not remove our troops from Iraq. Because right now, we have approximately 2,500 troops still stationed in Iraq, even though Iraq's government is now a somewhat friendly one to the people who have captured our government, as Iraq is certainly allowing the multinational corporations to profit from Iraq's oil, so mission accomplished. And it's also been years since the threat of an Islamic State existing on Iraqi land has been bombed out of existence. And the Iraqi government has said over and over again in no uncertain terms that they want us to get the out of their country. And so, yeah, let's repeal the war authorization and GTFO. And this bill would have accomplished half of that. But even if law, it wouldn't have facilitated the GTFO of Iraq part because the Department of Defense says that its activities in Iraq are justified under Article 2 of the Constitution because their operations in Iraq protect U.S. armed forces in a combat theater, and Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which provides the right of self-defense in ongoing military operations. And of course, there's still the most problematic authorization for the use of military force that was passed a few days after 9/11. The one-paragraph one that authorizes, basically, war against anyone, anywhere in order to prevent future attacks against the United States. That's the one that really needs to be repealed. But no one's even talking about doing that. And so repealing the Iraq war authorizations wouldn't actually prohibit the military from doing anything they're doing right now, which was acknowledged by the nonpartisan CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, which analyzes the effect that bills would have on spending, and who said that this bill becoming law and the authorizations being repealed would save us exactly $0. So that's an acknowledgement that it wouldn't change a damn thing and would be largely symbolic. But ending the Bush family Iraq wars is a good start, even if symbolic, and most senators agreed. And so if your senator is a Democrat or is independent, there's no need to look this one up. If they voted to officially end the Bush wars. But it was the Republicans. 30 of them voted to keep the Iraq war authorizations alive. And so, if you don't approve of endless war in Iraq, it's probably a good idea to look up the vote on S316 and vote those senators out of office accordingly. If they're up for re-election, of course, because only a third of the Senate is up for firing in every election because they're elected to 6-year terms. Moving on from the Bush oil wars to what the oil is being fought over for, let's take a look at S4072, which I like to think of as the Pollution Production Act. And the intended effects of this bill would be to prevent the enforcement of a new rule for cars and trucks that would set stricter federal standards for fossil fuel burning cars and trucks and their pollution. The new stricter pollution standards for new cars would be phased in between model year 2027 and 2032, and the standards could be met via the production of cleaner fossil fuel-powered vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, hydrogen, and electric vehicles. Basically, it wouldn't require any new technology that doesn't already exist. It would just require companies to prioritize emission reductions in their designs. And the financial benefits for all of us who breathe in the United States are going to be huge, because the Environmental Protection Agency estimates that the air pollution reductions would provide a $13 billion savings in reduced annual healthcare costs by preventing the emission of thousands of tons of particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds. And the EPA estimates that new standards would save Americans $46 billion per year in fuel costs and $16 billion per year due to reduced maintenance and repair costs for drivers, which they say would total about $6,000 saved that stays in your pocket over the course of a new vehicle's lifetime. But S4072 would prevent all of those benefits, also that the car and truck market can be free to design their products as cheaply as they see fit, allowing them to keep putting out old, unnecessarily polluting technology if they think that that would allow them to pass more money out to the shareholder class. But the worst part of this bill is that it not only kills this finished clean air rule, but it would also prohibit enforcement of any similar rule that could be written in the future. And so basically, this bill would allow fossil fuel burning vehicles to keep polluting at their current rates forever, even though we have all the technology we need to reduce the involuntary poisoning that we are experiencing because of other people's vehicle choices. I hate this bill, in case that isn't already clear, but the Republicans, they loved it. Once again, no need to look this up if your senator is a Republican, because every single Republican senator who voted yes on allowing fossil fuel vehicles to keep poisoning us at current rates forever. And as for the Democrats, most of them voted no on this. And you know, there are a lot of similarities that are frustrating between the two big parties, but I have to tell you that on the environment and on pollution, the differences are stark between Republicans and Democrats. And I have seen these differences repeat themselves consistently over the 12 years that I've been doing this. The Republicans are 100% the party of pollution. The fossil fuel industry has that party by the balls. Where people who legislate for cleaner air and water exist, they exist only in the Democratic Party. But there are some exceptions, and on this bill, 3 Democrats sided with the party of pollution and voted yes on S4072. And let's name them, because they're all up for re-election. Well, 2 out of the 3 are. So the 3 Democrats who voted with the party of pollution are Jon Tester of Montana, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, which was surprising to me, and this one isn't surprising, Cole Barron Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Now, Joe Manchin is leaving the Senate voluntarily this year, and good riddance, bye-bye. But both Sherrod Brown and Jon Tester are up for re-election. Now, unfortunately, they are both running against members of the party of pollution, and so voting against them might not be the right play if you care about clean air and water. But based on this vote, why would they do this if they don't think that voting for pollution is a winning strategy in their states? Or maybe not in their states, but definitely with their donors. And so perhaps with 1 month left before their reelections, aka 1 month left of them giving a shit about what you think, this might be a good time to communicate with them if that vote for endless, unnecessary vehicle pollution doesn't match what you consider Democratic Party values. And then finally, we have a Senate vote on reproductive rights, specifically the right to use scientific breakthroughs to help you get pregnant and carry a child to term. This bill is S4445, the Right to IVF Act, and this bill is necessary. Because in February, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that according to state law, frozen embryos are children, despite that being obviously ridiculous considering that an embryo, which is a developing cluster of cells that is the size of a raspberry at its most developed stage, well, an embryo can't possibly survive as a human child without a host body to help it grow. But this is 2024 when so much doesn't make sense, and Alabama says that embryos are children, which means that disposing of or accidentally dropping or otherwise killing an embryo is legally the wrongful death of a child. And this is a problem for IVF clinics, because IVF clinics take embryos and implant them in women in hopes of helping that embryo become a child approximately 9 months in the future. But often, not all embryos are implanted. Sometimes they're frozen and stored for future implantation. And I must point out that we're not generally able to freeze our children. But anyway, sometimes parents choose not to continue with implanting every frozen embryo created, and when they choose to stop implanting their embryos, those embryos need to be disposed of. Or sometimes the embryos need to be moved from location to location, where accidents sometimes do happen and an embryo doesn't survive. There's all kinds of things that can happen to these clusters of cells, and in Alabama since February, all of those actions that cause the death of an embryo can leave anyone involved vulnerable to being prosecuted for killing a child. It's fucking nuts. Now, Alabama, I do have to say, has since passed a law giving IVF clinics limited immunity for operations, but that legislation didn't address when a cluster of cells becomes a child. And so clinics in Alabama are still closing instead of continuing to take on the legal risks. And so, United States Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, who's an Iraq war veteran who lost both of her legs when her helicopter was shot down and who was only able to conceive her 2 children with the help of IVF treatments, well, she wrote a bill to make sure that IVF patients and providers are legally free to participate in this life-creating process. And her bill, S4445, what it does is it guarantees an individual's rights to receive fertility treatment, make decisions regarding the donation, use, storage, and disposal of sperm, fertilized eggs, and embryos, and enter into contracts with healthcare providers to enact their decisions. It then guarantees a healthcare provider's right to provide fertility treatments and provide for testing, use, storage, shipping, and disposal of genetic material collected and stored in the IVF process. Her bill also guarantees a health insurance provider's right to cover fertility treatments and guarantees a manufacturer's right to manufacture, import, market, sell, and distribute drugs and devices that are used for fertility treatments. Then, to combat any backward states like Alabama, her bill allows lawsuits against any state or individual who interferes with the right to fertility treatments by the Attorney General, healthcare providers, and individuals adversely affected. And her bill makes it crystal clear that this national law would supersede any back-assward state law regardless of when it was enacted, and prohibits enforcement of any state law that is in conflict with these rights. And then, taking this all a step further, her bill also makes IVF affordable for a whole lot more Americans. Because her bill requires the Department of Defense to provide fertility treatments, specifically 3 egg retrievals and unlimited embryo transfers, to active duty military members or their spouses. And I think this is where the bill becomes controversial to those for whom it's controversial, her bill requires health insurance plans, Medicaid and Medicare to provide coverage for fertility treatments. This is literally the most pro-life bill I have ever seen. It helps create new life in very tangible ways. And 44 Republicans voted against it and killed the bill because it needed 60 votes to move forward. And why would anyone who says they're pro-life vote against this? I think it's the money part. Because health insurance companies in particular would have to pay for fertility treatments. And as soon as I saw that, I understood why people who say they are so pro-life, but in reality go to Congress and represent the shareholder class, I can see why they would vote against this. Because every penny that goes towards paying for healthcare is a penny that doesn't go to shareholder portfolios for the health insurance industry. And the goal of health insurance companies is to bring in as much money as possible from government and our premiums and pay out as little as possible, and so requiring them to cover more, especially something as notoriously expensive as fertility treatments, it's a non-starter if you represent the shareholder class. And so when forced to choose between voting for literal life and voting for shareholders, 44 Republicans told you exactly who they side with. And to save you the need to look this up, the only 2 Republicans who voted for this amazing pro-life bill, along with all of the Democrats and independents, were Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine. And if you are represented by a Republican, and those are not their names, then you can pretty much know that they voted against the most pro-life bill that I have ever seen. And so, those are all the single issue votes that I've got for you in your study guide in the episode 301 show notes. And hopefully that should be enough for you. And again, please use and share the show notes. Our production assistant Claire's masterpiece. And please pay for this show so that I can continue to pay Claire. And Mike, our editor, and Lauren, our accountant, and Mark, our web security guy. And we have a whole team here at Congressional Dish, and I need to pay them. But this is a podcast that remains advertisement and therefore politician and corporate influence free, which is a big sacrifice during an election year when we could make a ton of money on candidate ads. We refuse to air them all. But we've left that money on the table now for 6 straight elections because this show doesn't exist for them. It exists for you. And it also does not exist for the companies that own the rest of the media. But this only works if you return the value you receive from this podcast. And so please, sign up to support us per episode on Patreon, per month on PayPal, as often as you choose with paper checks or Zelles, whenever you want with Venmos and Cash Apps, or any other way that works for you. I work for Chipotle gift cards and Bitcoin and whatever else kind of financial treasure you prefer to pay with, and in however much you consider fair. The only amount that feels unfair on our end is 0. But anything you provide is much needed and appreciated. Now, unfortunately, we have no executive producers to announce today, but I do have to admit that I'm not sure if that's because we actually have no one to announce or because my sister forgot to update our executive producer list because she is a mom and she was sentenced to chaperone 90 children on a field trip on a boat. And so, yeah, she was kind of busy this week. And so if we have any executive producers, we're going to credit you on the next episode. I hope you can forgive us. We'll read your notes on the next episode too. And if you want to be that executive producer, executive producers get to put your name and therefore your vouch on the episode that you are most proud to produce. And that also moves that episode up the most valuable episodes list on congressionaldish.com, which helps new people decide which episodes to dive into now that we have over 300 of them. And one more thing before we go. I just want to give you a quick update on government funding because as most Congressional Dish listeners know, Congress's most basic job is to fund the government every year by September 30th, and I'm recording this on September 27th, and they're going to fail again. Now, this is a task that they have failed to complete on time ever since the mid-1990s, and so this is not surprising this year considering the clown car of a Congress that we have. But after some drama that was so dumb that it's not even worth your time to hear about, the House and the Senate have agreed to extend their funding deadline to December 20th. And while it's not law yet, I did read the bill that extends the funding deadline. It's called a continuing resolution. And there's nothing crazy attached to it. It is dingleberry free. But what that means is that our government is going to be funded until right before Christmas again, and it's most likely going to be finished during the lame duck, which is terrible news. Because that means that a bunch of lawmakers who just got fired in the election or who are retiring, many to go make millions in the corporate sector, well, they're going to be accountable to no one. And they will have the ability to attach things to a must-sign bill on their way out the door. Now, this shouldn't be possible. Like in the UK, when they elect new people, the new people take office right away. But here in the United States, we allow this situation which facilitates hidden, corrupt dingleberries weaseling their way into our laws. And they have set this up to occur 5 days before Christmas when no one's paying attention. But I'm going to be paying attention. And assuming that they do not let this dingleberry opportunity go to waste and kick the deadline into the new Congress, which is actually possible with the level of dysfunction in this Congress, maybe that'll happen, but I doubt it. But assuming they fund the government and get their dingleberries into law around Christmas, I'm expecting to spend most, if not all of January combing through that new funding law. It's always thousands of pages and shining light on all of its secrets. Or at least that's what I'm planning to do if you pay me to do it. But yeah, another Christmas crisis is now scheduled to end one of the worst Congresses of all time. And it's fitting, really, because there was no way that this Congress was going to end on a high note. It was just not something we could reasonably expect. And so on that note, I'm going to go play volleyball and check the fuck out for the weekend. And my suggestion is that you do your election homework using the show notes, share the study guide that I made for you on social media or via email, and then treat yourself with checking out for a few days too. It's good for you, and you will have earned it. So yeah, happy voting. Talk to you later. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. What the facts? And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.